Let's get started. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you, Lord, for all your blessings, for all your provisions. We thank you, dear God, that we do live in a great age where we're able to study and search and keep searching, keep learning, and just continue, Father, to guide our minds to keep expanding, Father, to keep searching, to keep questioning, to always want, Father, to discover the truth, to understand what things are really like, Father. Bless us now as we come to your word, Lord. Illuminate our minds and hearts and help us, Father, not only to understand your word, but to apply it to our lives. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. We have a small section today, and if we finish quickly, we'll finish quickly. If not, if it takes longer, it takes longer, but it's only 5 verses. I don't want to go to the next section yet until next week. Romans chapter 7, verses 7 through 12.
Genesis, my goodness.
That's always a good place to start, the beginning.
No, it's just that I went to look for that thing and now I lost my...
It's 1680.
1680.
Okay, thank you very much.
Romans chapter 7 and verses 7 through 12. And Rose, would you read that for us? Wait, let's wait for Angelique to get it. You got it?
Sorry, I am a slowpoke.
It's okay. 7 through 12, please.
The law and sin?
Right, the law and sin. What shall we say then? Is the law sinful? Certainly not. Nevertheless, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. For I would not have known that coveting really was if the law had not said, "You shall not covet." But sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, produced in me every kind of coveting. For apart from the law, sin was dead. Once I was alive apart from the law. Once I was alive apart from the law. But when the commandment came, sin sprang to life and I died. I found that the very commandment that was intended to bring life actually brought death. For sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. So then the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, righteous, and good.
Amen. Again, there's 2 sections here. The first section is verses 1 through 12, where Paul is talking about Israel and the law in the past. And then verses 13 to 25, we talk about Israel and the law now, in his circumstance at that point. And that's where he goes into the whole I passages, about himself and stuff like that. But Paul makes it very clear that the law itself is not guilty. The law is not sinful. Obviously, the law was given by God to Moses, and that's what he means when he talks about the law. He's not talking about the Old Testament, but about the actual Mosaic law given as a covenant between Israel and God. Again, Paul does throw us off because when we come to this passage, maybe we're expecting at one point he's just going to turn around and say the law is bad, the law is sinful. But no, never at that point. It's always going back to sin. Sin is the horrible thing. Sin is what took advantage of the law to use it against the people of Israel. But the law itself is good. Any questions? Any initial questions? Verse 7 through 8. What shall we say then? Is the law sinful? Certainly not. Nevertheless, I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. For I would not have known what coveting really was if the law had not said, "You shall not covet." But sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, produced in me every kind of coveting. For apart from the law, sin was dead. Now here Paul, of course, is viewing things as they really are, from the perspective of God. Is this the way Israel viewed things? Absolutely not. Israel would not have seen themselves as in any way failures or unable to keep the law. They would have seen themselves that, yeah, they fall, they sin, but again, they have Yom Kippur. They have places they have ways of atoning for their sins. Even the law makes provisions, so they would not have seen themselves as like hopeless, enslaved, doomed. So Paul's not speaking from the perspective of Jews of his time, and he's not even speaking about his perspective before he became a Christian. Because remember, before he became a Christian, he thought as to the law, faultless. He believed in his heart that he really was abiding fully by the law, and that he was an example even among Jewish men, young men at the time, that he was outstanding even among them. So it was never, you never see that kind of angst, suffering, agony type, which you find here. And people always taking this passage, many have taken this passage to kind of make it sound like Paul had a personal experience like this in the past. But that really sounds very contradictory to what he says in Philippians 3.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was very self-righteous. There's no sense that he was really in turmoil. On the contrary, he felt that he was right. And these Christians were wrong and everybody else was wrong. But now that he's become a Christian, now he's able to look at things and see them differently. You know, maybe when we were in, a good example is like when we were in the world, we may have thought what we were doing was fun, it was great, whatever. Once we became Christians, we realized, man, I was dead. I was blind. How miserable, how stupid I was. Look how I was out there dancing and drinking things. I think that was the life, and now I realize that was death. But you can't see that until you get on the other side. Paul's viewing it from the other side. He's viewing the law and Israel and God from the perspective of someone who's had an encounter with the living Christ. And now he looks back on it and says, this is what it really is. This is what it was. And this is what it is now. But Israel's still in bondage. And the law, which was supposed to deliver, did not deliver. On the contrary, made things worse. And put them even in greater bondage, because now instead of being able to keep the law, they're breaking more laws. You know, because of course, if there's no law, there's nothing to break. But once the law says, thou shalt not, now you can break it.
Right.
You know, the common expression we say, when someone tells you don't look, and you go, where? You know, as soon as something comes in that gives that kind of trouble, then that only makes things worse.
Is the law then like a pattern of things that are right, like a guide, it's supposed to be looked at it that way, in a sense?
The law was
Direction, a director.
Was strictly a covenant, an agreement between God and Israel of how they were to live if they were to be the holy people of a holy God. You know, I hate to sound so but if I don't say it correctly, it sounds almost like kind of general. It's not general. It's a very precise covenant that says, you know, I will be your God, you will be my people. These are my obligations to you as your God. And I will do these, and I will give you all these blessings if you keep your side of the covenant, if you obey. If you don't obey the covenant that we're making here, the agreement, and you break it, then these are the curses that will come upon you. And they had a chance, of course, to accept that covenant or reject that covenant. And they accepted it. The people of Israel accepted it. And there were times when they were falling back and ready to give up on it. And they went into idolatry, they did all things that were wrong, and then there'll be a renewal of the covenant, like there was in Joshua 24. We look at Joshua 24, which is very famous for when Joshua says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's but if you look at that passage, it's a renewal of the covenant. He talks about, you know, how God delivered them out of Egypt. He goes through the whole story again, just like when you tell the Ten Commandments, you tell a story about how he delivered, and then he says, but you have turned to these things now. If that's what you want to do, you want to turn to these other gods, sorry, but it's for me and my house.
Yeah.
We will serve the Lord. And that's when the people say, no, we want to be part of that too. And he says, are you sure? You remember what it means to say that you want to be in this covenant? And it's a renewal of the covenant. And that happened time and time again. Eventually, the covenant becomes obsolete. Now, of course, for the Jews, they don't believe it has become obsolete. They still think it's ongoing. Obviously, if you're celebrating Yom Kippur, you think that covenant still has validity. And Paul says that covenant no longer has validity. That covenant could not be kept. And so God had already promised in Jeremiah and in the prophets that he was going to make a new covenant. And the covenant was going to be based upon his power and his grace, not upon their ability to keep it. And the covenant would not be on stone tablets, but upon the human heart. And of course, the new covenant is through the blood of Christ. You know, so... but it is an agreement. It is again, it's one covenant that Paul's referring to, because he's not talking about the other covenants. The covenant with Abraham was an unconditional covenant. God tells him what he's going to do for him. Abraham believed God and God counted as righteous, but Abraham does not have to do anything. God says, because of you believing me, I'm going to do this for you. And many times in the Old Testament, you'll see that God is ready to obliterate the Jewish people. And then he goes back to, because of your forefathers, because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I will not do this, I will not do that. So it kept going back to them, and because of their faithfulness, they were spared.
That's like the blessings of several generations that he talks about. So he's blessing other people because of what those three did, in a sense.
No, he's sparing them from not being destroyed. He's not really blessing them, but he's saying, I'm not going to destroy you. You know, and even then, they still end up in exile. They end up because they continue time and time and time again to break the covenant. They were never ever faithful to the covenant, not as a people. You would have faithful Jews who kept the covenant with God, but the nation as a whole never did. And today I find it humorous, well, not humorous, but I find it interesting that even Yom Kippur, you have to do without a temple. You know, how do you really do Passover? How do you really do all the sacrifices without an actual temple, actual sacrifices? They've had to spiritualize it. But that's not part of the covenant. The covenant was not a spiritualized covenant that you can, you can pretend in your heart. It's like, that sounds very Christian. You know, so, you know, for Christians, we don't need anything like that. It's a covenant with God and us. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. But for the Jews, they need a physical temple. You know, if they're going to follow the old covenant. And the fact is that they don't have one. So, I mean, it makes it very difficult. I mean, I don't know when they spiritualized it. I don't know what point. But there must have been a point where they had to very early on. Because the temple's been gone since 70 AD. So somewhere in early Judaism, they had to have had rabbis reinterpret things to make it acceptable.
Are they doing that today? You know, like interpreting different things in writings or not?
Not that I know of. No, because today that would be extremely difficult. Because Jews are no longer just Jews. Today you have like the Orthodox Jews, who would consider themselves the only true group. And then you have like most people that were celebrating Yom Kippur were like almost like secular Jews. They go about their business doing, you know, like Catholics. Oops, I'm recording. But it's true. Catholics, you know, they play religion. They go through the rituals, and they, you know, on Easter they go, on Christmas they go. A lot of Baptists do that too. You know, but they're not really living out the Christian life. Well, secular Jews, basically, the only thing that you know they're Jews when they put a little hat on or they go to synagogue on special days. But other than that, they have no real relationship with God or reading the Bible or anything. They don't do that. So, it's pretty messed up. But it's just ritual for them. But today there would be, as far as I know, there are no rabbinic teachings that way. If there are, we're not privy to it. Again, the Orthodox live very separate lives from everyone else, and they're not like other groups. Because other groups, usually when someone leaves the organization, you can find out about their group. But I really don't know much about the Orthodox Jews. They're very integrated into themselves, and so if they do have more rabbinic tradition, unknown to me. You know, but either way, they have so much already, because they have the Mishnah, they have the Talmud. The Talmud itself is like 22 volumes. You know, so the Mishnah is a commentary on the books of Moses, and the Talmud is a commentary on the Mishnah, and it goes on, you know, and so it's very intricate. I don't believe there's anything beyond that. There might be, because I have actually Jewish writings in there that I purchased them, but I really don't know what they are. I was like, one day maybe, if I feel daring, because I tried to read the Mishnah once, and I was like, I cannot read this, because basically it's just laws. Like, you know, I started reading once because I wanted to learn about the purification laws, but I mean, it's just laws. When you do it, it's almost like when you do it like this, don't put the cup over here. If you put the cup over here, make sure you put this far. If you don't put this far, make sure. And I'm like, oh no, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I cannot do this. I'm sorry, Lord. My patience only goes so far. And the whole book is like that. the whole book. It's like it's this big in translation.
Jeez.
I'm like, oh no, sorry, I can't do it. You know. And the Talmud, I forget about it. If I ever buy a Talmud, it'll be on disc because it's 22 volumes.
Oh.
I have nowhere to put it. But they have all kinds of writings that way, yeah. But as far as I know, the Talmud was the last one. I don't think there is.
When was that?
That was after the 2nd century. The Mishnah is the 2nd century, but the Mishnah claims to be, is written in around the 2nd century, but it claims to have teachings that go all the way back to the time of Jesus and before Jesus. And some of them do seem to be. Like, remember when we were talking about marriage and divorce, and I mentioned Hillel and Shammai, and that tradition is in there about the question of that. And Hillel was the tradition that won. Every other tradition, like, for example, I don't know what happened to the Sadducees. The Pharisees won, and the conservative party within the Pharisees won. And they went from being a political party, which is what they were when the time of Jesus. They were trying to get power, and they were trying to a spiritual party. Once the temple was destroyed, they turned inwardly, and they became very spiritual. And so that when you have people that are much more into spirituality, into prayer, into alms, and things like that, and not into changing the world system. Yeah. But that was later on, because even Simon Bar Kokhba in 135 revolted against Rome, and they believed he was going to be Messiah. That didn't work out too well either. They were slaughtered, the people that followed him. So interesting history. I just never pursued all those lines of thoughts. Maybe one day I will. Any other questions?
Okay.
N.T. Wright, I had a quote here from him. He says, the present passage seems then to be a Christian theological analysis of what was in fact the case, and indeed what is still the case for those who live under the law, not a description of how it felt or feels. This is the fact. This is the way things really are. Whether a Jew sees it that way or likes it that way or feels that way, it doesn't matter. Paul says this is the reality, because everything that we interpret post-Christ. And because of what Christ has done, who he is, that becomes the lens by which we interpret everything. And we can see that the law was bondage, that the law, although good, ended up being something that brought greater sinfulness to Israel rather than holiness. When he says, I would not have known, the Greek word that he uses for known, ginosko, is knowledge of personal acquaintance. It's, for example, the word that's used often for, like Adam knew Eve, intimacy, not simply cognitive. It's an intimate. So he talks about an intimate knowledge. I would not have known what sin was had it not been for the law. So he acquired an intimate relationship with sin. Israel acquired an intimate relationship with sin because of the law. Sin took advantage of the opportunity of the law to enslave the Jews. The Greek here carries the metaphorical sense of a military base of operations, an opportunity, a place to launch forward an attack. So sin took the law as a base for itself. The law is good, the law is meant to be for holiness, but sin took a hold of it and made it a base to go forward and attack and conquer through it. One Greek dictionary reads this way: literally a base or circumstance from which other action becomes possible, such as the starting point or base of operations for an expedition, then generally the resources needed to carry through an undertaking. So it's a metaphor for conquest, for military. So the sin goes into law, takes grab of the law, and makes it now the base from which it's going to work to make Israel fall into greater sin than before. Now, interesting, he mentions the sin of covetousness. And of course, people have gone bonkers with this, trying to, again, think that this was a sin that Paul had a problem with. Although he never mentions it anywhere that he had a problem with coveting. But of course, it's a reference to the 10th commandment. But again, let me challenge you that what Paul is doing, and he's going to do in these verses, and he's going to continue doing, is that Paul, don't forget, he's had Adam, Israel, and now Christ on his mind. And he doesn't explain to us the details because he's not writing to us. But I do believe that he's using covet because it's a sin that relates to Eve and Adam as well as to Israel. Remember, what was the sin of Eve? That she coveted. And the Apocalypse of Moses, which was a writing that was around the time of Paul, and Paul may have been acquainted with it, attributes that to Eve. And that Eve would have looked at the fruit, saw that it was good, saw that it could do it, and First John captures this as well, and she craved it, she desired it, she lusted after it.
So only wanting it becomes a coveting?
Yes. Well, no,
Only wanting
he stresses the sin of covet to show, the downfall of Adam and the downfall of Israel. That at the very time when God says, "Thou shalt not covet," they immediately engage in that very kind of sin.
Mm-hmm.
And they duplicate what Adam and Eve did. Adam and Eve are given a command, and they covet, they fall. Israel is given a command, they covet, they fall. Rather than being faithful to God. And that's how he's using it. I really believe that's how he's using it, that Israel reenacts the fall of Adam and Eve. Because think about it. Adam and Eve are given a command by God. Israel is then given the commandments. And they do become it becomes like another Garden of Eden. Here you are. I've been delivered you out of your bondage. You're in the wilderness. I'm going to create a paradise here.
Mm-hmm.
Create a paradise. And he uses a lot of temple language. He uses a lot of garden language. And yet they falter as well. They fail. They mess up just like Adam did.
Mm.
So much so that one person said that it was Adam in Israel falling again. And certainly that there's some truth to that. Any questions? Now here's where we know that Paul cannot be speaking about himself or about any Jew at that time where he's writing. Because he says, "For apart from the law, sin was dead. Once I was alive apart from the law." No Jew would ever say that, because every Jew always had the law. Since the moment they were born. There was no time when a Jew in Paul's time did not have the law. Now some commentators try to connect this to like the bar mitzvah. The time of 13 when a boy becomes a man, and he would have been aware of sinfulness. But Paul literally says that there's a time when he did not, that he was alive apart from the law. Mm-hmm. Impossible. Every Jewish child was raised with Torah. Just like every Orthodox child today, I'm sure, is raised with Torah. Mm-hmm. From the moment they can do Gaga Guleo, they're already being taught. They're already reading and understanding the Torah. In the time of Jesus, which I had studied a little more extensively when I was doing the Gospels, every village had a teacher that would come, a rabbi, and they would take time to teach the boys. Obviously, girls did not learn Torah. To teach the boys early on the rabbinic scriptures, to know Torah. And there were portions that were memorized. Obviously, they heard it in synagogue every Sabbath. But there were portions that were memorized even as they were being taught.
Like Psalms? When they taught to memorize Psalms?
There were passages, whatever, I couldn't remember exactly the details, what passages that were taught. But there were things that they were taught. So much so that that even when you see Peter and Andrew, those people, they're fishermen. Mm-hmm. And yet they have a knowledge of the Hebrew scriptures. Because, again, even as fishermen, as boys, as little kids, they would have been taught. And one of the reasons they were all taught, of course, also to see if there was rabbinic material among them. Because you would have certain boys that would excel. Then they would be taken under the wing of that rabbi, or set separately. And so the other kids would then go on with their trade, but this boy would also then go on to further studies. Mm-hmm. Unless you came from a prominent family or a wealthy family like Paul, who already had a wealthy family, had a prominent family. He was taught Torah from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And as soon as he could, he was sent to Jerusalem to study under Gamaliel. So there was no time when he was apart from the law. But again, what he is thinking is, remember that Adam was made a living being, and he was then commanded, and then he disobeyed and he died. And this is the idea. The idea is that of Adam in the garden, having this law given to him. He's alive apart from the law. There was a time when Adam was alive, apart from the law. The law comes, God gives him a command, and now comes death because disobedience comes in. James Dunn in his commentary says, the thought is rather of the childhood of man, the mythical period of the human race's beginning. And Paul says that kind of was in a way also reenacted in Israel when they received the law as well. They were innocent, they didn't know these things, and now here they were learning them and breaking them. Any questions? The very commandment that was intended to bring life actually brought death. Now Paul does not believe the law can grant life. It can promise life, but it cannot deliver it. Again, the most probable solution is that the thought here is still governed by the allusion to Adam. If Adam had lived according to the commandment that God had given to him, then he would have enjoyed access forever to the tree of life. He would have had the life. So the very commandment came to give him that possibility, to eat of the tree of life and live forever. But he disobeyed. And again, relating it to Israel and their failure. Verse 11, and here again we see the Adam allusion. For sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. Again, the language deception is the language of the serpent. You know, Adam and Eve are there. They have the possibility. The serpent deceives them. And now Paul relates the serpent to sin. Sin is very much, it takes the place of the serpent, takes the place of Satan, who was the one who came in to deceive them and to make them fall. And again in verse 12 he says, so then the law is holy and the commandment is holy, righteous and good. The law is good. It is sin that took advantage of the law and used it against us. It is not the law or the Jew who is to blame, but Paul will say it is sin that's to be blamed. And here, of course, sin being the correlate in the Old Testament with the serpent, taking advantage of a situation. Satan taking advantage of Adam and Eve and their innocence and deceiving them to believe that they could acquire through this something that they could not acquire through this. And they fell. And Israel as well believed the lies of the enemy, and rather than worshiping God, made idols and worshipped other gods. Any questions? No questions at all?
No?